My guest today is writer, game master, and game designer Johnn Four.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt and I am your host. Oh, guys, I am excited to come to you every week with this podcast. I really hope that you guys enjoy it. I am having an incredible time interviewing all of these amazing guests, and I am just thrilled to be able to bring you some new exciting person each week so we can learn how to be better game masters and better role players. Now, I am the author of a bunch of RPG resource books. You can find them at dicegeeks.com. You can also find them on amazon.com. My name is Matt Davids, or you can just search for Random Tables on amazon.com. You can let me know that you enjoy the show as well by doing a couple things. You could drop me an email at matt@dicegeeks.com and just let me know if you're enjoying these interviews and the show. Also, you can head over to patreon.com/dicegeeks and consider supporting the show financially. That would be incredible if you did so, and it would just be a vote of confidence so that I know I should keep seeking out the best guests that I can find and keep producing these episodes each week. Now, today I had a great conversation with somebody who is well known in the tabletop RPG gaming communities, and we had a fantastic discussion. So let's just go ahead and get into the interview. My guest today is the game master and writer behind roleplayingtips.com, Johnn Four. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Matt. Glad to be on here.
I just wanted to start off, how were you introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
Well, let's see. The short story long is in grade 5, a student had tricked or convinced the teacher to run a D&D game on a Friday afternoon for the entire class. And that was about 30 kids, one dungeon master. Okay. And within 20 minutes, the class fractured up into friends groups, and really no one was playing D&D anymore. But I got enough of a glimpse of the game to really enjoy it. And then when that DM decided to try running a lunchtime game, I was a player, and he had a long queue of people who were interested. So I got my shot. I got to play my cleric, and I lasted about 2 minutes. My guy got eaten by a carrion crawler. And so I was hooked after that. Even though the overall experience both times was pretty terrible, I really got a joy from playing a game and being a character, and all the cool little dice that I didn't quite understand. And the books, they're fantasy and dragons were on them and stuff. We were playing the basic set. Mm-hmm. And so that was the start. But then after that, I took a little bit of I didn't get actually into D&D until the following Christmas. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand what I was playing, and I was really young, and I didn't know how to get into it myself. I didn't understand it was a product and this and that. Mm-hmm. But at Christmas, my best friend got the beginner's box along with a couple of adventures. And he said, well, I don't want to read all this stuff. You do it. And then that's when, I got the books in my hand. And now I understand. Things started clicking. And then, that was 40 years ago. So that was the start, was really that Christmas when my friend gave me his Christmas present. Uh-huh. And that was just amazing.
No, that's great. I'm just thinking about your class and your teacher trying to run a game for 30 people. The largest I tried running for 14 one time. Wow. And that was too much, but I think I managed to pull off at least one session with it. But 30, I couldn't really imagine 30, especially playing Dungeons and Dragons.
No, I mean, the person was young. I don't know how much experience they had with the game before then. But my max nowadays is 6. Mm-hmm. Anything more, I really like 4 or 5, and that's my comfort zone for group size.
Yeah, I know, especially for Dungeons and Dragons, or games that involve so much player, their turn involves so much, so many things that they can do. It eats up time. I know I had 14 in West End Star Wars game system one time, and that was that was too many. But so do you just play mainly Dungeons and Dragons these days?
Yeah, so it's a changing thing because I used to play a variety of different systems, but I've always played Dungeons and Dragons basically from the basic set on through to AD&D. I think AD&D was released the same year I started playing, but I started with the basic set and then through all the various editions. So right now I have 3 D&D campaigns going, all 5th edition, and then so my goal is to GM once a week like I used to, and I found that it's actually easier and more exciting for me to have a weekly game, even if they are different campaigns, than to have to wait a long period of time between sessions. I get a bit of a momentum, and it's always on my mind and kind of things like that. So this 4th week, there's a few other systems that I really enjoy, like Savage Worlds, Night Black Agents, Blades in the Dark, and just a few other systems. So that 4th week, I plan on running one-shots where I get to try out some of these games that I've played but not GM'd. So I would guess you would say 75% is D&D and 25% is game of the week kind of a thing.
Oh, that's great. How do you keep track of 3 campaigns at the same time?
It's not too bad. So I've started a homebrew world. It's called Duskfall. And I haven't built my own world in like 2 decades. And so I really wanted to kind of experiment with some ideas and put to use some of my own advice and kind of prove a few things out. So all 3 campaigns are in the same setting. And the cool thing about that is even though the setting is bare bones right now, every moment in game, in any of the games, is building up the setting. And then I get to reuse that information with the other campaigns. For example, a cleric in one session, I'm having to figure out who the gods are, their names, and their kind of shtick and what their plots are in the world. And then when I start doing that, I'm bringing that over into another campaign, and then I build on that a little bit and bring it back. And then the other thing is I've created a region within that world, so kind of bottom-up strategy, but makes it bite-sized. Like, how do you eat an elephant? You can only eat them one bite at a time. So I've created one little spot in the world called the Badlands. And so 2 of the campaigns are set in the Badlands. So now whenever gameplay occurs in the Badlands, I get to reuse the components and things like that. They're in parallel universes, meaning I'm not trying to keep a singular timeline for some kind of permanent record of this world. It's purely like in a development and in a hypothesis stage. So both of these groups will never meet each other. I'm just reusing the elements and using the campaigns as a way to build up the world pretty quickly. And then I have a system where I write some notes before the game, and then I make a few notes during the game. Players also make notes during the game. And then after the game, I kind of curate my notes and write a few important things down that happened in an app. And then, it just so far, no problems keeping things straight just because I have different, I put my notes per campaign in separate kind of buckets. So all of that so far, wish me luck that I don't go insane with 3 campaigns in the same world, but so far it's working out.
Yeah, that sounds great. Now, I guess a common question that I always get is, how do you prepare for a session?
I think I go different. The common answer for many people is as little as possible. But I like thinking about the game a lot between sessions. And so I do a lot of what-if scenarios. I try to provide, I just wrote about this in my newsletter, kind of an algorithm of a combination of, okay, well, if this happens, then what could happen next? Okay, if that happens, what could happen next? And all that thinking, it either generates tangible ideas that I execute immediately, or it kind of creates a space where, in my imagination, where I've kind of touched on all of these possibilities, and I find I just draw on those during the game. So all of that thinking happens mostly during the commutes and when I'm not otherwise engaged, like doing chores or whatever. I just winterized the house, so that was a few weekends outside, and that was perfect time to kind of mull over things. And then I have a character development first kind of a strategy where I'm looking at what the characters want to do and what they are about and building the world around them in a way that I remember fondly that Greyhawk did and that what we did in our early campaigns when I was still in high school. And that was, for example, if you have a character who is a fighter, then I'm wanting to make a fighters guild or some kind of world element that involves fighters in some way. And mercenary guilds is what I ended up called the Ruin Seekers. But by building that in the world, I also engage the character because that's kind of a neat thing. They can skill up and get some good resources and information that way. And then it also engages the player. So I guess for like session prep, I draw a lot on my factions and on all these ideas that I prepare in advance. And then I let the moment by moment stuff happen in the game. I don't try to micromanage my plans before a session. So I guess another word for it is sandbox. And but I still don't have the complete like sandbox stuff built for these campaigns yet. It's a work in progress. Oh, and then I also have just come across or have finally read Mike Shia's book on the lazy game master. And so I'm trying out his pre-session prep method, which ironically I wrote about similar, was it like 15 years ago for role-playing tips. And but he's got some new ideas on that, and that's got me excited. So now I'm kind of testing his method, merging it with my old method. And just I won't give you all the steps, but for example, you would write down some ideas for cool locations. You would write down some ideas for secrets that you might want to reveal. And you would write down some ideas for some monsters or foes that you might want to appear. And so you bring to your session basically this box of Lego that you've got semi-prepared. And so then it's just up to you to kind of improv, assemble them based on, kind of what decisions the characters make. So that was kind of a long, rambling answer. I don't know if it answers your question, but I kind of do a lot of thinking and then a little bit of writing and then rely heavily on world development.
So you actually then, take time to write down the ideas and that before the session begins?
I do. And then I have kind of a separate file in my organization app where if I have an idea, I write it down. And then if I get inspired, I'll flesh out an idea further, just for the fun of it. And then I draw upon those during sessions in part or sometimes in whole. And I'm not trying to deliberately plan for sessions. I'm more just, having fun, playing with ideas, doing creative, doing some little bit of creative writing and then strategy. So, combats, I've been guilty of just throwing random battle maps onto the ground or onto the table. Mm-hmm. But, looking at the monsters and their strengths and weaknesses and kind of designing combat environments, that's a lot of fun. So I'll kind of do those on the side. And then if they become applicable or if there's an opportunity to use them, then I will. How do you prepare for sessions?
Well, that is an interesting question because I just published a book called The No Prep Game Master
nice.
A few weeks ago or a couple months ago now, I guess, when this airs. But I tend not to, I say no prep, but of course what I mean is I'm always thinking about running a game. I am always thinking about ideas or, I'm watching a movie, I'm reading a book, I'm thinking, ooh, that would be kind of fun, or reading the monster manual or reading the rule book and thinking, oh, that would be fun to kind of do that in a game. So in some sense, as I mentioned in my book, in some sense, I'm always preparing to run a game, but I do fall on the side of no prep that I like I like the ability just to say you're talking to a group of a few friends and they say, oh, do you still play D&D? I've always kind of been interested, but nobody's ever run something. I could just say, oh, well, I'll run something for you right now. Let's play. And I just like that, just, better. And perhaps, I just had some bad experiences, when I was younger. Either I prepared, I would spend a lot of time, when I was a teenager preparing, and then nobody would show up. or the group would fall apart. And so maybe I've just had, some kind of soul crushing experiences like that before, where I spent a lot of time in prep and then I just never got to use it. But yeah, but then also, I mean, as I get older, of course, I have a wife, I have 3 boys, I mean, it's just like, if I get 3 hours to play a game, I don't have 3 hours the night before to prep for that. So, I if I have time to run a game for my guys each week, well then, I don't really have much time to prepare. So I try to take that route. Of course, that being said, we took a break for a while, and then I decided to run the Curse of Strahd, and I am just being reminded kind of over and over again, just how much preparation it takes to run a campaign like that. I mean, the campaign's great. It's fantastic. Yeah. I love the way it's written. I love all the stuff about it, but it's just been killing me that it has so much prep work. Yeah,
I struggle. I've tried a few times to GM a module like that, and I just failed because, like you said, the prep time. You basically, if you create a campaign out of your head, even if it's on the fly through improv, like your approach, you've done that thinking and stuff. But
yeah,
when you're creating a campaign, you have that in your brain. You don't have to learn it and study it. You've already thought of it. You just have to basically remember it and get your facts straight. But when you come across a 256-page tome of an adventure path, you really have to study and remember and memorize and plan, and then understand the material so well that when the characters and players inevitably go off the preordained track described by the adventure, you understand it well enough that you can accommodate it. And I just fail at that. It just doesn't work the way that my brain works. I think it's like biology in high school. I just really struggled with just trying to put these disparate parts together and kind of come up with, there's no knowledge. It was just a pure memorization exercise. And that's what it feels like preparing these big adventures sometimes for me.
Yeah. And like I said, I had become interested, and I had wanted to try out a published campaign because I hadn't run one in a long time. And this is the first one that I've ran in years. And I'm just, again, remembering, that, you just have to remember every little detail. And my players are heading towards this town, and I'm like, oh, there's 58 pages of material on this town, where normally when I'm running, something that I've created, the town just comes alive because I either thought about it or just because I'm going to roll some random things at the table and just create it there. I just, I think everybody has to find their own style and that, but I just always, don't want to, kind of discourage somebody from running a game because they say, oh, there's too much prep. And it's just like, well, I would rather people be playing role-playing games than, saying that there's too much prep.
For sure. And I've got emails and seen evidence online. Many game masters really thrive with published adventures. So I'm speaking just from my personal brain and its limitations, but I know, like you, I think many other people do well with those things.
Yeah, and after I finish Curse of Strahd, I'm definitely going back to my no prep method and kind of what I normally do.
Homebrew, yes.
Yep, homebrew. Yep, absolutely. I guess, what would you say to somebody who, maybe they've played a little bit and they think they have an idea for a campaign, but they're just something's stopping them from becoming the game master for the first time? What would you say to somebody like that?
Well, I would schedule a session. I would get 2 or 3 people together for that, and then put it in the calendar. So it's kind of, you've made a commitment. You've got other people now adjusting their schedules, and it's become real. So that puts a little bit of a deadline pressure on you. And then go out and find a very simple adventure for low-level characters, first-level characters, if you like. And there are free ones out online, or read some reviews, and find a 16-page simple adventure, or go to the one-page dungeon contest website, and there's tons of free one-page adventures that's good enough for an evening's worth of entertainment. You can use my 5-room dungeon model if you want to create something instead of use something published. But then with this 2 or 3 people, that makes it a lot easier for you to manage. You don't have to do as much table gymnastics. And a simple adventure means you don't have to study as much, but you also are given that structure. So you don't have to understand story structure, or how to build encounters, or how to balance encounters, or to factor in all the things that a published adventure often will do for you. And then, and then keep it low level, because then the character complexity is pretty low. And then if the players you're playing with are new, then you're not having to do double duty of teaching them a really complex 10th level character while trying to teach yourself how to GM. And then the night of, once you've got the idea of an adventure in mind, and you've kind of done a little bit of prep work for that and understood what you're going to do, then try to find some pre-generated characters, Google for those, so then you can start right away, and the players, you don't have to teach the players how to make the characters and whatnot. But then study the monsters a little bit, and any kind of crunch that might be available in the module. I won't assume what a system you're playing is, so you might have a pure storytelling system like Fiasco, or you might have something crunchy. But just the gotchas on new GMs is, okay, well, what does a monster do? And if you've played before, at least you understand how to make attack rolls and stuff. But by just studying those few little elements, NPCs, monsters, and encounters and traps, then when the night comes around or the day comes around, don't put pressure on yourself to run a perfect game. Be transparent with your players, saying, hey, if there's anything that I'm doing wrong, just let me know, and we'll course correct in the middle of the game. Don't make it a big thing. It's easy to say, but hard to do. It's like telling a person not to worry. But if you can just enjoy the moment, even if it's a terrible moment, it's still you're playing a game. It's still better than a day. What is it? A day fishing is better than a day at work, or worst day fishing is better than the best day at work, or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Just enjoy the moment, and you'll encounter all the things that experienced dungeon masters will take for granted, even including like procedural stuff, how to roll initiative, or how to run a combat, or how to adjudicate an action, to the storytelling, like how to provide details, and how to describe or picture what's going on in your mind. But embrace that. That's the learning curve. So don't expect to be able to do all that. Instead, use the first session to get an idea if you'd like to do this more, and then kind of what are the 1 or 2 things that kind of caught you up the most that session, and then work on that. And then it's really interesting that the players are enjoying themselves even when you're doing a bad job, for the most part. It depends. There's some nuances there, but like a first-time game master, if the players want to play with you again, then that is a huge vote to keep on doing it and learning, no matter how well or poorly you thought the session went. Oh, and another thing is plan for a short session, like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. Longer sessions will just drain you, and then your performance will just degrade, because I think there's a little bit of muscle buildup for GMs over time, and doing things that doesn't drain them so much to be able to play longer sessions. And then at the end of the session, have a chat with your players and ask, well, what did you like and what didn't you like? And quite often it will be their favorite moments in the game, the situations and whatnot. And what they didn't like might be they didn't like the villain, or they didn't like something about the rules or their character class. And it's uncommon that players will say, well, I didn't like you. I mean, I've never seen or heard of that feedback being given, except in extreme circumstances. And so that would be my recipe. Grab something simple, enjoy it while you run it, and have a little bit of a feedback session afterwards, and then do it again.
Yeah.
Well, how would you approach it?
No, I mean, that sounds about right. I would just say, don't worry about it. Just do it. when I first started running games, I played D&D the first time when I was 9 years old, and then the next day I ran my mom through a dungeon.
Awesome.
And I didn't even think about it. And it was actually a few years, after I had been playing for a little while and then running games and stuff for my friends, I kept noticing, people saying, oh, well, I would ask them, oh, do you want to run a game? And they would come up with kind of, it's like, oh, well, I don't know how, or I don't know this. And my whole mindset, like, I just didn't even understand that, because I just thought everybody, if you played a few times, you'd run a few times, if you played, you'd GM, so I've never understood kind of that mindset of somebody just kind of saying, oh, well, I don't know enough to be the dungeon master, or I don't know enough to be the game master. I don't buy that. So I would just say, jump in and do it. I mean, your model was great as well. Just, if you want to be prepared for that, be prepared, just dive in and start doing it. And there's no
magic
kind of
pill or anything.
Yeah. There's this, it's just doing it, the experience, once you do it one time, then you should be able to do it, better the next time. And it just kind of rolls from there.
And it's worse if you're an adult. So if you learn as a kid, no problem, because children don't have that critic mind developed. Yeah. They don't have a sense of perfectionism, and they don't have fears from a lifetime of like traumatic moments that they'll kind of, associate with trying something new. So if you just do it, then you get to see what it's like, and then decide if you want to keep doing it. Otherwise, you'll never know, and it'll be a regret.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. I never, never once when I was, 9, 10, 11, 12, even 13 or 14, never worried that I looked like a fool or something like that. It just never crossed my mind.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Now, there does seem to be something that happens with people who run games a lot. And of course, being online these days and in forums and things, a lot of people who've run games for a long time, I don't know if there's a lot of them, but you hear them and they are very angry and they sound very bitter. What are some of your thoughts on that?
If I meet a bitter person, I go the other direction. But let's say it's a friend or somebody, or it's part of your community, and you can't avoid such people. Then, you're not dealing with the game at this point. You're dealing with psychology.
Yeah,
and the game is just a medium at the moment for them to kind of work through or exhibit their psychology. So, if you can, just have a conversation. Don't get defensive, or don't try to have a point of view that you're trying to defend. Instead, you're just trying to figure out, okay, where is this negative energy coming from? It also helps, I think, to be a listener and not trying to solve them. So I think people that are in a certain state of mind don't like being solved. They're not a problem for other people to present solutions. And I think otherwise, it's based on context. I'd have to see it. For example, I've seen on Reddit a few conversations where GM A will just have right now a low point in their life, and they're just angry at the world. And so that's okay. I hear you and I see you. And then there's GM B who says, well, I have a problem player, and this is really grinding me down. And I'm thinking about hanging up my books and whatnot. And so with the case with B, we can get into a little bit more detail and look at solutions and options. So I think, without being a psychologist myself, I would defer to more specifics to give you more exact answer. But otherwise, I think all people deserve to be heard, and separate the message from the messenger. And they're in pain, some kind of pain right now. And so if you can just be a little bit empathetic, and then go on with your day, and hopefully they work it out. But I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. Where my answer is on a spectrum of good behavior or what.
Yeah. I think it becomes difficult when, if you have problem players that are are people that you can't just say goodbye to or something, but like say you play with your brother or something all the time or something like that. But on the GM side, it's just I don't know if you are becoming angry at your players, if you're becoming bitter and kind of resentful to your players, I say step away from it. I say, take a break. Just let them know that. Let them know that, if if your life has changed and you have gained new obligations and new responsibilities, and you used to run these amazing sessions that took you 15 hours to prep, and now you can't prep, and your players are saying things like, oh, these sessions aren't like they used to be, or something like that, and you're getting kind of angry. Just take a break. Let them know. Say, hey, look, my life is different now. I need to do some other things. Maybe one of you guys could run a campaign for a little while.
So that's the perfect approach.
Yeah. So that's what I would say, definitely. Why don't you tell us about roleplayingtips.com? Why did you start that website?
Wow, so I started it in 1999. Wow. It's in its 20th year now. So going back in my time machine of my brain, I wanted to do something. So I had an internet company. I built websites, and I wanted to bring something about my hobby to the online space. And I met with a friend, and we came up with an idea called the art of role-playing, which is sort of like Game Master tips, but we also thought about multimedia adventure designs and a few other things that we had planned out. And then he had a friend who was interested. So the three of us got together and we started doing it, and we wrote a few articles together, and we were making progress. Summer hit, and then fall, it all fizzled. So there's no real motivation or momentum to keep on this project. So I decided to let that sit and do something else. And so I realized that, and I don't know how I got this idea, but being a game master is pretty lonely in the offline world. Unless you go to a convention every weekend, you don't really have a group of peers in general that you can plot with and share stories with and joke with and whatnot. So I thought, well, what about a newsletter online where I ask game masters for their tips, and then I share my own, and then I share it back to everyone what everybody wrote in with me about, a game master tip exchange. And so there's still an element of that in role-playing tips today, where I get great GM advice from GMs all around the world, and I publish those in my newsletter as well as my own thoughts on things. And so anyways, that worked. I had 3 subscribers, I think, in the beginning: my mom, myself, and my alternate email address. So it wasn't a grand launch or anything. And the funny thing is, if you ask my grade 12 writing teacher, they figured I would not be doing writing for a project of this scope and size. Like 3 million words later, I would not have been writing for WotC and other companies and writing my own books and stuff like that. So, and I would never have guessed that I would enjoy writing, because writing essays in high school was like pulling teeth. Man, I just did not like that exercise at all. But I stuck with it, and as Christmas came around, I had a few newsletters. It was a weekly newsletter. I had a few newsletters under my belt. You can see in the archives how I was experimenting with the medium and what I wanted to say and finding my voice. So I don't think I really hit my stride until like the 30s or 40s or 50s in the issue count. But anyways, it started like that, and then it just took off from there. It became popular. Back at that time, there were very few websites that were dealing with role-playing games. There was Elfwood and Etrigan's site and a few others. All the action was on Usenet at the time. But GMs seemed to resonate with the idea of sharing ideas and tips with each other. And so 20 years later, I'm still doing that. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, and I have to say I've been a subscriber to your newsletter for quite a while now. It's fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
It's just some amazing tips and advice on how to run games. It's just it's just absolutely fantastic.
It's easy when GMs are generous and share their ideas. Doing this over 20 years, you kind of build up this mental library of tips and techniques that other GMs have inspired in me and whatnot. So it's really the community is what I think makes all those tips and stuff possible.
Well, you just mentioned it. What products did you work on for Wizards of the Coast?
I did the Dungeon Master's Guide 2 for 4th edition, and I was a columnist, a monthly columnist for Dragon Magazine for a number of years. And I think that's it.
Now you have put together quite a bit of quite a number of resources for game masters. Could you run us through some of those? I know you have like an NPC tracker and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for allowing me to shill a little bit about this stuff. So yeah, there's some cool free stuff. I do a bad job on the site on making the free stuff visible. I just updated my homepage about 2 months ago to surface some of that stuff. So if you go to roleplayingtips.com, on the homepage, you'll see things like what you just mentioned, the NPC tracker and its companion, a campaign tracker. Both are PDFs. And so the way my mind works, it's weird. I like ideas and pools and kind of uncertainty and fuzziness. And then I also like lists and hierarchies and having things like stat blocks and prompts in order to be able to fill out, kind of an information about an NPC or an element of the campaign. So the two trackers are definitely on the latter. They are printable forms that you can plan NPCs with, track your NPCs with in a kind of a minimal format without trying to burden the GM with too much prep and too many details. And then the campaign tracker is like a combination of campaign planner and a campaign log. So there's every page is a different form, and each form has a different function. Like I talked about, a little bit of world building mixed in. I think my favorite in the campaign tracker is the graveyard, where you record the dead characters and their last words, and the source of death. But so there's that. There's some ideation PDFs, including 650 fantasy city encounter hooks. And I think it's 1,278 roadside encounter ideas and things like that. And those actually came from the community. So I run contests in the newsletter once in a while where I say, hey, just send me ideas you have on this topic, and I'll edit and format it and standardize things so it's really useful for other GMs. And then I publish it as back free to the community. And so there's those. So, and there's more stuff like that if you poke around the site.
Okay.
Oh, wait. One big thing, actually, I think would be valuable for game masters who are struggling to come up with, session plans or adventures is a 5-room dungeons book. Okay. I just released, I think it's 371 pages of the 5-room dungeons model that I invented and how to create it, plus 88 example 5-room dungeons that the community generated as part of one of those contests I mentioned, as well as the past, I think I invented it in 2003. So since 2003, all the articles and things that I've written on that topic, as well as some tips from readers, I compiled into this book, had it professionally edited, professionally laid out, printer friendly. Anyways, you can get this 5-room dungeon ultimate guide for free at roleplayingtips.com as well.
You also have some campaign settings available, don't you? Or at least one?
I have one. It's not a setting, though. How about I call it an adventure and pretend you asked me about that?
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to get it mixed up. Sorry about that.
No, that's on me. So the Demon Plague, it is a setting because it's level 1 to 20 for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And it is a confined setting. It's almost like a snow globe. That we did it that way. James Intricasso and I, James was my co-writer on this, we designed it that way so that any GM could plop it into basically any setting. All you need is space for a little mountain valley somewhere in your world. And then we introduce things like a few deities and a few world elements that are easily compatible with Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Eberron or other settings, or your homebrew setting. But the Demon Plague is about basically when natural disaster strikes these people in a valley and nearly wipes them out, and the surviving element of civilization is a small village, and the PCs make their way to it as refugees. They get embroiled into this political plot at first, and then a larger threat emerges as a plague that was previously trapped within the ice. The Demon Plague starts to affect people and spread, and the characters have to figure out how to stop the plague and what the source of the plague is. And it turns out that there's this multi-thousand-year-old history of reoccurrence of this plague. So all of that history is technically world history and setting the table for the setting, as it were. So you're right. It is kind of a setting book. I think of it as an adventure. I'll just call it 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Anyways, you can find out information about that at my site as well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no problem. And of course, I will link up your site and the Demon Plague and all of that in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. Now, before I let you go, I guess one last question, maybe I don't know if it's too big of a question. If there was one thing that you wanted to tell every game master out there in the world, what would you tell them?
Wow. That's a good question. One thing, this thing that always tricks me is anyone asks me like for a top 10 list or something, I'll give you my favorite movies or books, but I always have trouble figuring out my favorite movie and my favorite book and my favorite song and whatnot.
Yeah.
My tagline at Roleplaying Tips is to have more fun at every game. And that was the basis. That's been there since the start. And by that, I mean, whatever way that you find this hobby is engaging and fun, then pursue that. If you're having fun as a game master, then chances are your players are having fun as well. You're bringing that enthusiasm and positive energy to the table. And so for me, and I think there's other GMs out there like this, I like learning. I like doing new things and discovering new things. I think that's what fed Roleplaying Tips in the early days was, wow, all these smarter GMs that are smarter than me are sending me their tips. And it's just, I'm learning so much and it's so fantastic. So I have a desire to kind of master the craft of GMing, and I have a long way to go on that. But what that means to me is always wanting to learn something new about GMing and trying things, and in doing so, learning about myself. So I think if there's one thing, and I don't think this applies to every game master. Some people, once they're done school, they're done. But if you can take on a beginner's mindset at every game, try to learn. And always try to be improving your GMing. It's such an amazing thing. It is a social game, and it's a strategic game, and it is a thinking game, and it's a right and left brain kind of a game. And the role of GM encompasses all of those. It's a leadership position. It's just so many things. So it's such a deep kind of a role within the hobby that you have almost an infinite amount of things to learn. And quite often it becomes introspective, and you can learn things about yourself at the same time, which I think is a very noble thing. And I guess one of my core beliefs is that play is important to having a good life. I think if you just spend all your time working and being unhappy and whatever, being negative, then at the end you'll have a lot of regrets. But I think if you have a well-balanced life, then you'll be happier, and play is an incredibly important part to having that balance in your life. It just, I don't know, you study play, and there's many things that it does for you. So I think that's two. So I cheated on your question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. All right. Well, my guest today has been Johnn Four. John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. This has been fun.
Well, that does it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation that I had with John today. As I mentioned, I have provided links to his website in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. Now, if you want some free stuff, please head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get 10 free dungeon maps, plus some other RPG resources, and you will never miss an episode of this show. Also, if you like this podcast, please consider reviewing it in your favorite podcast app. Those reviews just help more people find the show. I thank you for listening today, and until next time, keep gaming.